Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.
Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by re-recording mixer Nick Offord, whose work includes The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, Pam and Tommy, and of course The Offer, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
I guess my first question is, like, when I look at Pam and Tommy and I look at The Offer, they're both historically based, I guess, which is kind of weird to say because I grew up watching The Godfather and in the 90s. So I guess, how do you determine what you want sound-wise for a historical piece? Like, because if we go back to the old, the 70s stuff, it'd be negras and stuff like that, and the 90s might be DATs, and they all sort of have a sound. So how do you determine a sound for a film that's a period piece?
Well, there's a lot of time spent on picking out certain things. For, like, example, if we're playing something through television or radio, we want it to have kind of that vintage tube feel. Or there's a scene where they're showing a lot of the camera machines locking up, spinning and winding down. So there's a lot of, like, very specific things in that time period that we will try to get right as best we can. There's other things too, like there's trucks on the lot that are they're beeping.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to make sure did the trucks beep in the 70s, or did they were the golf carts gas, or was electric golf carts around then? So there's conversations that happened to make sure that we're period correct.
Mm-hmm.
In those times. We don't want things to be too clean because it is the 70s. So sometimes we would use like some tape saturation on some of the music to kind of gritty it up a little bit, give it that tape kind of feel.
So has it, because, like, I think about when I started, it was just at the cusp of the 90s changing over to the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember back then, a lot of sound people were like, no, you have to stay analog because it's got that nice warm sound.
Yeah.
So did you need to create that sort of nice warm sound for, like, I think The Offer would be all on the old reel-to-reels. Yeah,
we did, like the tape saturation kind of gives it that analog feel, So we did do some of that, especially with the main title music. Some of the music sequences, we used some tape saturation to give it that kind of. It's called like a tape, the tape compression, that feel that you get from working with tape. Pam and Tommy was a little bit different in the sense that we didn't quite do, as that tape saturation type feel. We didn't do with Pam and Tommy, but what we did do was the show had an arc of, like, we would start off with the tape, right? I mean, it's all about the tape.
Yeah.
So when they're making the tapes and going into the VCRs with this really chunky kind of like sounds of VCRs locking up, and this really cool kind of heavy real feel of tape. And as the show arcs, when Pam and Tommy are introduced to the internet, because they really didn't understand it back then, according to the show, we start to transition into like modem sounds and dial up, and that like clicking the computer would do as it's like trying to. So that was really fun, because when I was younger, signing on to like AOL, you hear that dial up, and you, like, as soon as you hear it in the show, it immediately takes you right back to that time. You're like, oh, I remember that, having to wait for it to load and all that. So that was pretty cool.
Now, do you find that nostalgic, or do you find it, because I remember when it was dial up, I was like, oh, that's such an irritating sound, but nowadays I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Really, it was kind of cool. It was like, oh yeah, that was I remember when we had to wait. There's even a line in the show when I think Seth Rogen's character says they're talking about 56K modems, like that's never going to happen, so it's like it's just really funny. And they were just figuring, I mean, it was right when it started, so they were all kind of figuring this out.
Yeah. And then someone would pick up the phone and your internet would just go
Yeah.
off.
Yeah, I think they say in the show, they're like, he goes, what is the internet? And Pam says, oh, it's just something you plug into the phone. Like they're trying to figure it out. So it's pretty funny.
Now, one of the questions, like whenever I'm interviewing an editor who's cutting the picture,
Mhm.
if it's based on a real story, I'm always asking about, um, where's the line of pushing fiction and reality? Do you find that there's a similar sort of issue in sound in terms of realism? Like, how much do you go back to the original sort of sounds, and how much are you like, no, we have to push this to a more modern sound?
Um, it kind of depends on the show, what they're asking
Hmm.
for. I think, again, like The Offer, we used more original stuff that would be very specific to the 70s. I mean, that was a more real, like not more real, but like it was more raw, I guess, and real life. Whereas Pam and Tommy, it was very real, but it had moments that were kind of over exaggerated with big music and big cuts and big dramatic edits and stuff like that. So that was a little bit more of a modern style, I guess, for a 90s
Yeah.
show. I guess that would be the better way to put it. The style of the show called for it to be a little bit more modernized,
Oh,
as
interesting.
opposed to like what we did in The Offer.
Now, was there a particular scene in Pam and Tommy that you found really difficult, but you're happy with the outcome?
Well, episode 2 had 27 needle drops in it. It was song after song after song after song. I mean, and they were in music clubs, and they were in
Mhm.
Mexico, and they were in, we had these big songs for when Pam arrived. So finding a way to transition from all these different songs and make it feel smooth and coherent across the whole episode was, it was a lot of work, and it was a lot, but it sounds great. It feels really good.
So when you're working with music, did you guys use particular music to or particular needle drops for to build tension or anything like that for the characters?
Yeah, so all that stuff's chosen before it gets to me. So that's
Mhm.
all done in the edit room. And Craig Gillespie and Dee Dee and Rob Siegel all picked fantastic music. And so when they give it to us, it's up to, we kind of have a blueprint of how they want it, but we really have to massage it into the show, whether it's going to be playing in the music club while they're talking,
Mhm.
or then we transition to a scene where they're doing shots and just having a rager, a huge party. And so it's like we have to figure out how to make that all work coherently so it's smooth to the viewer.
Now, how do you like to find a like as a re-recording mixer? How do you like to find a balance, um, between the music that might be the background and the foreground audio?
Uh, well, dialogue's always king, right?
Yeah.
So that number one rule is dialogue is king. That has to be, everything has to be intelligible, because you can't hear the dialogue, you don't know what's happening in the story. So it's a lot of work to try to get the, like in a scene like when they're in the music in the club,
Mhm.
we want to make sure that all that dialogue is very out in front forward, feeling natural still, but it's a delicate balance between what's happening in the club with people dancing and music and drinks and all this other stuff going on. So, um, it's a lot of work to try to get those to work. But with the score, the score is usually more supportive, so that can kind of sit a little bit lower and get big and powerful when it needs to. So that's usually not too much of a problem with the dialogue. It's more the needle
Mhm.
drop, all the source music that we have to be really careful with.
Now, when I think about dialogue, depending on where things are shot and what's happening, you might have to do some ADR.
Yeah.
Now, how much of is the responsibility of sort of getting it to sound like the original track is the ADR recorder slash dialogue editor, and how much would that be your responsibility?
Well, the ADR recordists, they're very important because they can listen to the in and out line and kind of get the inflections and pitch and give, you know, say, hey, maybe let's try another take. Could you just kind of go up on this letter or up on this
Mhm.
or come down, or they can give little suggestions like that. I mean, you never want to you want to let the artist do what they want to do, but they can help the situation there, and then the dialogue editor will go through all the takes, pick with the director or showrunners, and pick which one they like, and then when they give it to me, I make it sit in, and feel like the production.
Is there any tricks or techniques you've learned over the years to make it sound more like
Uh,
the production?
ADR is always like the hardest thing.
Yeah, I
Pam
know.
and Tommy had a lot of ADR,
Oh, really?
a lot more than you would think, because for the first few episodes they're naked most of the time, and so they didn't have mics on them. But
Yeah.
and Lily James was very, she wanted to make sure her she would hear something like her accent come out, so she would want to record the line, and we would put it in just to try to she wanted to make sure Pam sounded right.
Now I have to ask, as a Canadian, did they work to get Pam's accent Canadian, or did they just make it North American?
It's North American. Yeah, because she's British, so
Yeah.
so I think I didn't know she wanted to try a Canadian accent on top of her
Yeah.
American accent, so but they do go to Canada for
Oh,
one of
yeah.
the episodes
Yeah.
for a quick minute.
Oh. Now we talked about Pam and Tommy, and if there was a difficult scene, was there one in the offer that you found particularly hard but were really pleased with?
It wasn't necessarily, it wasn't hard from like a technical standpoint. It was hard
Mhm.
from we wanted to get it right. Was episode 8. There's a scene where um they're setting up to shoot where Marlon Brando gets shot in The Godfather. It's a very
Mhm.
iconic scene of The Godfather, and they they juxtapose, messed up that word, 2 episodes on top of each other. I mean, two storylines on top of each other, really. The mobster getting, he ends up getting murdered down the street at a restaurant while they're shooting the scene of Brando. So they wanted the viewer to know what's going on with the shooting of Brando while watching this other scene. So we had to tie those two together with a lot of sound and sound design, and we had a great score from Issa Summers, and it worked really well. And the build up in the score, the cross cutting between the 2 episodes, and then we had like this feedback loop that came in with the score that really brought in the really made it dramatic when they come in to shoot Joe Colombo. And the editorial team did a great job. Picture editorial with the oranges and the Godfather, when that falls, it's such an iconic thing. We ended up using like a basket of bread to fall for when Joe Colombo got murdered, and then they cut back between the two. It's just like a really cool kind of nod to the Godfather. So that was, getting that scene to work right took quite a bit of time.
Now, were you a little nervous because Walter Murch had done the sound on the original, and there was a lot of iconic moments in there?
Yeah. I mean, you can't touch the Godfather. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like the most royal movie in Hollywood. Like you just can't do anything with it. So our show was about the making of the Godfather. So
Yeah.
we have our own show about that, and it was very proud of what we did. But yeah, you can't compare to the Godfather.
Now, you also worked on Dopesick.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with that project?
I actually worked with Danny Strong on Empire when he did
Okay.
Empire, and post producer Gwen McPherson and I had worked for years together, and she contacted me and said, "Hey, I'm doing this show called Dopesick with Danny. Didn't you work with him on Empire?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay, great. Let's see what we can do." And it all worked out, and I'm so glad that worked out, because that show is incredible.
Yeah. Now, how do you like to work with directors, I guess, to get the sound of a film or a show, right? Like something like Dopesick or something like
Yeah.
Pam and Tommy.
Well, they're all so different, so that's the
Mhm.
fun part about this, about what we do, is that the next show we work on is going to be totally different than the one we did before. um Dopesick was challenging in the fact that the score, Danny really wanted the score to be very subtle. It was very supportive. I mean, the actors are so incredible on that show.
Mhm.
We wanted to let them have their time, and all we were doing is supporting what's happening on screen. All the sounds in that show are very, very real, and when we cut back, as we go along with the characters, and their quality of life starts to diminish,
Mhm.
all of the sounds around them are starting to diminish too. So there's a really cool arc in that show about how the sound changes with what's happening with our characters. So it's just kind of about building that relationship with the showrunner directors on the first episode, or a feature you might do with a couple attempts with the directors, so you kind
Mhm.
of have an idea of what they want to do with the movie moving forward, and just building on all those as the show goes on.
Now, when I talked to someone who worked on like Marvel films, they created sort of like a library that they share amongst all the sound people, so that Captain America's shield sounds the same from show to movie. For Dopesick or something like that, would you create something like that for the editors to use, so that they're not having to put in the bad sound effect that you might use several times?
Right. I think we'll have a sound editor that,
Okay.
and so they'll kind of have, once we get that first episode in, that's kind of the benchmark moving forward. It's like, this is the theme of the show. This is what we're going for. Let's use, we don't want to repeat, obviously,
Mhm.
because it's not like something like the shield of him is a little bit different, because that's something we're going to come up a lot with. Dopesick, show like Dopesick or Pam and Tommy, we want to keep like the sounds of the cities the same, sounds of
Mhm.
those kinds of things, but there are going to be other elements that change throughout the series as well.
Now, I have a selfish question here. I noticed you have a tattoo. Can you tell us about it? Because I can just see the word Hollywood.
Oh yeah, I it's kind of like an homage to Hollywood. I've got some film, I've got a camera, but most importantly, I have a gramophone. I wanted to do something to sound, and
That's awesome.
it says you haven't heard anything yet, which is a
That's awesome.
kind of a nod to the jazz singer, the
Yeah,
first,
yeah.
first talkie. So I thought that was kind of fun.
Wow, that's really good. Now, I have
Yeah,
one last question for you.
sure.
We've been stuck in this pandemic for, well, going on 3 years, I guess now, or 2.5 years. Is there a show or a movie you've discovered in that time that people should check out if they get quarantined?
Well, I think everybody probably watched it, but I think my favorite was White Lotus. I thought
Oh,
that
you see, I haven't seen that. I'm gonna
oh,
have to check that out.
was so good. It's so
Yeah.
cool. It's so original. It's just got this like quirky, dark humor. It was great.
Mhm.
It was great. I loved it.
Oh, I'm definitely gonna have to check that out then.
Yeah, and the soundtrack was incredible. My really good friend Ryan Collins mixed it um, with Chris, and they did an amazing job. The score is incredible on that show, and I heard they're doing season 2. So
Oh, amazing.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
absolutely. I couldn't be more excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks. And that's it for this week. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, and of course, follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.
Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.